Oh, there we go. All right, wonderful. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for part two of our book club as we discuss Innovator's Mindset by George Couros. Welcome to those of you who are watching our Google Hangout on air and sharing your thoughts by leaving a comment below. And welcome to those of you who are joining us on Twitter. If you're new to the Twitter chat, I'm just going to take a second and explain how it works. We have two moderators tonight, Patrick and Stacy, and they'll have a chance to introduce themselves in a moment. So they're going to be posting questions as the questions are asked during the Google Hangout, and they're going to identify question 1 using Q1, question 2 using Q2, etc. So to respond to a specific question and identify your answer with that question, in your answer on Twitter, if you could use A1 to identify answer 1, A2, and so on. And if you just want to share your thoughts as you think them, then please feel free to do that as well. And if you would also please use the hashtag Innovators Mindset and hashtag AwesomeMOOC to identify your tweets as part of this chat, then our moderators can follow that and share your ideas during the Hangout. I'd like to begin by thanking AwesomeMOOC for hosting all of the fantastic content that's being shared as a result of our conversations about George Couros' book, Innovator's Mindset. And I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us tonight for this rich conversation. So why don't we get started by having everybody take a moment to introduce themselves. I'll start. My name is Lee Castle, and I am a full-time technology coach with the Avon-Maitland District School Board, supporting globally connected learning, blogging as pedagogy, and the integration of technology in one-to-one learning environments. And I'm also founder of the Digital Human Library. Patrick, I'll turn that over to you if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Great, thanks, Lee. It's Pat Miller. I'm the Principal of Innovation with the Simcoe County District School Board. I have a team of 23 instructional resource teachers who I just spend most of my time trying to catch up to. But I have a great job and really glad to be here tonight.
Okay, Stacy, if you'd like to chime in and introduce yourself. Oh, I think maybe we've lost Stacy. So Lisa, if you'd like to introduce yourself, and Lisa, if you maybe then want to pass the mic over to someone else on our panel, that'd be great.
I will do that. I'm Lisa Noble. I teach core French and instrumental music in Peterborough, Ontario, and the meaningful integration of technology is one of my passions. And with that, I will hand off to Tina.
So my name is Tina Zita. I'm an instructional technology resource teacher with the Peel District School Board, which means I support 50 schools at integrating tech. Can't complain. And maybe Mark?
Hi everyone, Mark Carbone here. I apologize, I'm in a little bit of a noisy environment, but I did want to say hello from Austin on behalf of Donna and myself. So I'll mute out and go back to kick off the conversation.
So Michelle, if you'd like to introduce yourself next.
Hi everyone, I am Michelle Parrish, and I'm a grade 7-8 teacher in Keewatin and Patricia District School Board, which is in northwestern Ontario. Although I'm a classroom teacher, I am very interested in innovation at both like classroom level and system level. So I'm a bit putting this to use in my classroom and also prepping for my future. So I'm really glad to be here with everybody.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining us. And I see that Stacy is there. So Stacy, I'm going to see if we can have you introduce yourself also. Well, we can't hear you, Stacy, so we'll try to have you pop in. I know, I'm sorry. We'll try to have you pop in a bit, and hopefully we can get your... Oh, I hear you. Oh, there's Mark. Hello, Mark. Are you jumping in, Mark, with something, or...? No? Okay. All right, perfect. So let's carry on. So in part two of George's book, Innovator's Mindset, we read about creating conditions that empower a culture of learning and innovation in our schools and districts. So let's start with one of the questions from chapter 4. And the question we'd like to discuss or start discussing tonight is how do you build relationships with individuals in your district, school, and classroom? Mark, if I could ask you just to mute your microphone for us, please, and thank you. So I'm just going to repeat the question one more time. So the question was, how do you build relationships with individuals in your district, school, or classroom? So I'm going to go ahead and mute my microphone, and please feel free to jump in on panel and share your thoughts about how you build relationships.
I'll jump in. We talked a little bit in the last session about the fact that sometimes as a classroom teacher, at the classroom level, this can be an easier thing than what some of our other panelists are working with, because I'm a core French teacher. I see my students every day from grade 5 to grade 8 quite often. And that gives me a huge opportunity to build relationships with my students. Sometimes it becomes more of a challenge with the staff. And I think one of the things that's been really resonating for me throughout the book is that idea of building that culture of trust. And that if that's not there, it's pretty much impossible to create that culture of innovation, to move to that next step. Because if people don't feel safe and people don't feel like, yeah, it's worth trying this, then it's very, very hard to do. So I'll pass that off to somebody else.
I think, Lisa, one point to what you were just saying, I think I definitely struggle with that. It was a lot easier to build that community with 6-year-olds than it is sometimes with folks that are older, especially in my situation where, and I think Lee would probably be in a similar situation where we see people sporadically. Social media has been a great tool for that, I think. It's allowed me to have relationships or connections that traditionally I wouldn't be able to foster. But I think when we talk about that trust doesn't come without relationships. And that's one of the hardest parts, I guess, in this job, is making sure we take the time to invest in those relationships. And it means that we can't necessarily invest the same amount in everybody at the same time, but making sure we're fostering some of those key relationships as we move forward.
And I agree with both Tina and Lisa. One of the things I'd like to add, though, is that we try and connect with people where they are. So if you're talking about an online connection, some people are on Twitter, some people are on Facebook, some people are still using email as their primary form of communication, or offline in person. And I think you need to go where those people are. So if you want to build relationships with parents, they're at the side of the school in the morning and at the end of the day. If you're looking to meet, connect with central staff, you go to the places and the events where they are. So I think it's a combination of connecting with people online and in person.
I think you're right too. It requires for you to be diverse in your approach to meeting people where they are. In our school, my comfort zone is just hanging out with my students during break, getting my work done, but getting out to the staff room and talking with people out on duty helps me to build relationships with people. And then when I have an idea, or when someone else has an idea to make our school a better place, that part of the work is already done, because we've been visiting and getting to know each other and knowing each other's needs and preferences for building our school into a better place.
I was really glad that that Patrick mentioned parents, because a lot of what we've been talking about in the Voxer yesterday and today has been about reaching parents and bringing that community in. And I talked a little bit in my blog post for the Blog Hop this week about the fact that with my parent community, a lot of my parents aren't coming with a positive experience from school at all. And even coming into our building can be hugely intimidating for them. And I'm starting to think that that's someplace I really want to start to think about innovation, is how do we make a more comfortable space for people for whom school can be kind of scary? And how can we start to shift that and then in that way help them shift their kids' perspective as well, if we can get that going in both directions. So for me, again, that's trust and relationships with a totally with another community that has to be on board in order to make things successful.
All right, sorry, I wasn't sure if Mark was jumping in there. The ideas that have been shared here, I think, are all key points, and we have so many relationships to nurture. The relationships with our students, with staff in our building, with the staff maybe that we're supporting if we're working at a system level, and of course our parent community, and even the community at large. If we're working on developing learning partnerships with our students, we're also extending that relationship piece to other community agencies that might be involved in the classroom or in the learning or in the education that's happening in our schools. One of the points that that George raised in his book that really resonated with me was not taking that day, if you're working at a system or district level, not taking the day to work in your office, but taking that administrative day and spending the day in a classroom or in a school, making yourself visible, but also being there to take in what's happening in that environment. I would love to know what's happening on Twitter right now. If I don't know if Patrick or Stacy, if you want to share some of the comments that are being made there about building relationships.
Sure. So we've got both Kristen and Wendy talking about building those relationships with subject matter outside of work or outside of school, and using that as a way to foster a deeper relationship. And we've got Penny Chaco out there said that it's difficult to collaborate with a teacher when you don't know them. You don't know anything about them. You don't have a relationship with that person. And so I think that's an important first step.
Excellent, thank you. And Stacy, let's try your mic and see if we can hear you now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Hooray! So what's happening on Twitter where you're at?
Okay, lots happening, and I'm really glad that Kristen chimed in, because Kristen is from my board, Superior Greenstone, and she basically is making a good point that sometimes we just have to stop talking about the lessons and just simply have those conversations, and they happen in the hallways and in our classrooms and in the staff room, and start from there. So thank you, Kristen, for joining.
I had a question for some of the people who are working in the coach role about how you do that, about how you start, because I know sometimes that I've talked to colleagues who are in that role, and sometimes it's really, really hard to get in the door, to get that welcome, to say, come and work with my class. So what do you do that starts that happening?
Bring candy. It sounds silly, and I know it may be, but we all need that entry piece. So sometimes I think for my job it starts with an app that I know will be an easy in, or sometimes it does start with bringing food just as a starting point, or it starts with a conversation just about how life is in general, and then trying to lead to one of those paths. I think a lot of times for my job, it's really building relationships with one or two people in a building kind of grow to other individuals as well, which it's hard to just walk in somewhere and say, hey, please hang out with me.
Another interesting thing is coming up on Twitter around the idea of risk taking and feeling safe in your environment. And so with leaders trying to make their schools safe places where people can take risks, that creates an environment where teachers can make the same environment for their kids. And so we've got a few people talking about how that is such an important part of building relationships.
Absolutely. Does anyone else want to share any ideas specific to this question before we move on to the next one? Any final thoughts? No? Okay, well, let's move on to our next question then. So this is a second question from Chapter 4, and the question is, how do you create opportunities for your school community to have learning driven by their personal interests? So this was, I'm going to repeat the question one more time. This is, I think this was one of the more challenging questions to answer, to think about today. So the question was, how do you create opportunities for your school community to have learning driven by their personal interests? So anyone who'd like to start that off? I'm going to practice my wait time.
I can always jump in first, you know
Bravo.
that. One thing that's been really exciting with the intermediates in my school is that I advocated, because I teach core French, sometimes doing something like Genius Hour or passion-driven learning can be really challenging because my kids do not have the vocabulary really to do that. And that's a dream of mine. But what I can do is do some coaching within my building with some other intermediate teachers who have a little more leeway to do that. And so one of my grade 7 classes 2 years ago started kind of playing around with the idea of Genius Hour and really looking at coming up with really good guiding questions. And it has been, just this week, I got to see an amazing presentation by a young woman who wanted to look at where fashion was going to go in the future. And she 3D printed a shirt. She designed a piece of clothing and went to a local lab that lets her do it and 3D printed a shirt and then had a model wear it. And it was so great to see how that practice of trying Genius Hour is really evolving. And it started kind of as a research project, and the kids are now sort of taking it in really different directions. So that has been one way, just kind of dropping little bits into people's ears. There's a great blog by Rod Lucier called Rolling Down the Window. And it's not about flooding people with information, but just the little bits. And that's one way that we've done it in our building.
I'm going to add to that. I read a book by Kelly Gallagher called Write Like This, and he talks about the importance of letting kids pick their own writing topics. And I didn't have a lot of experience with that in the first decade of my career. Everybody would write a persuasive essay about school uniforms or whatever. And then when I read Kelly Gallagher's book, I was like, oh my goodness, I need to tap into this. And because we're one-to-one, kids were now researching whatever they wanted. And one of the kids said, I want to research hotel chains. And I was like, what? Why? And he's like, because my parents have a membership at one, and they always make us stay at that particular hotel. So here, that would have never been able to happen before our one-to-one or before I had opened my own mind about having learning driven by his interests. And then I just wanted to extend that a little bit to say that I also, when I think about a PD day that's coming, I'll now be more vocal. Where I wouldn't have been years ago, I'm more vocal to my principal saying, would you consider doing this for the staff, or would you consider bringing this person in? Because being a teacher, I am aware of some of my colleagues' needs, and now I feel like I have to voice them to my admin team.
So we've got Amit on Twitter talking a little bit about the professional learning side of things and how voice and choice in professional learning is key. And I think that was a big leap that we made last year, offering directly to teachers the professional learning opportunities and them deciding which ones they wanted to be part of. So I think that part of it is crucial. It looks like we've got a few other people chiming in too, so I'll be back when I hear a bit more about that.
Hi, and Scott McKenzie echoed the same sentiment, Patrick, that you have to give students voice. And as Lee said tonight, she goes, I'm going to practice my wait time. And we know that as educators that we need to give students wait time, but how often do we do it? And the same goes for our colleagues. It's always a lot easier to fill the space, especially with our own voice. And so Scott pointed out that, simply ask them, give them the voice, and give them the time to answer. So good point, Scott.
Well, I think continuing on with that idea of student voice, and when we start to listen to that voice and the requests they make about the kinds of learning they want to do, I think it's important that we as educators too recognize where our limitations are in terms of our expertise and the support we can provide them. And I think coming back to that idea of community, and how do we draw from the school community and the expertise within our school community to amplify and enrich the kinds of learning opportunities we're offering in our classrooms. And I know in my board being very rural, you might not necessarily have a town or a city center where you can connect with, hotel chains, like you were saying, Michelle, or various other organizations. And the one resource that I do want to share tonight, speaking to this question, is the Digital Human Library. And, having access to experts in your local community and in communities on a more global scale who are available to come in and connect with your kids and offer a session. And almost all the experts in the library offer their sessions for free. So in my classroom, my kids work with experts almost every week. And the benefit, for their learning is it's almost unimaginable, really, because to have the opportunity to connect kids with experts in the fields of, science or math, and have them actually talk with real experts, because I am not the expert in the room. My professional learning in those situations as well is also amplified because I'm having an opportunity to connect and learn from these people as well. So that community partnership piece is very important to me and something I value, and having a resource like the Digital Human Library that's accessible to everybody, that offers programs for free, I think is one way to help your kids connect with those community experts. I'm not sure if anybody else wants to chime in on that question, or if there's anything else you want to bring in from Twitter.
I wanted to just jump in a little bit on the professional learning side that we were talking about. George talks in the book about this coach who knows his team players well enough that he gives them each their own reading at the beginning of the season. He knows what they need. And I went, oh, that would be so amazingly cool if we kind of knew our communities well enough to be able to say, okay, this person is really passionate about mindfulness and yoga and that kind of thing in their classroom. This might be a really interesting pathway for them. I have to give a shout out to Scott Johnson, who's the vice principal at a school in my board, who I know is watching tonight. And he did a really neat thing on a PA day in the fall, just I believe this past year, where he said to his staff, here's what we need to get done in the morning. In the afternoon, go learn something. And let them self-direct, and they had to sort of, in some way, kind of let him know what they learned. But that was the only limitation. It was learn something and be willing to share what it was. And I was just amazed by that.
Go ahead. There's like three of us waiting, right?
I just think that's a really powerful story, and I just, being part of working with eLearning Ontario, they've really changed the way they do their professional development, and they give us time to make it personalized, differentiated PD, and that shift in the thinking and has been so powerful for all of the, well, we were Elks when they started, and now we're Telts, to seek out the learning that we need. And it's just, I think, to do that in the school, and the story that you were just sharing, the administrator really needs to trust that they're professionals and that they want to engage in their learning, and so let them go out and seek the learning that that they're passionate about, and then again have them demonstrate it and share. But this idea that one size fits all doesn't work for our kids, so it's definitely not going to work for our colleagues.
And it also talks to modeling as well. And so I just put something out that said, if a student came to you as a teacher and said, hey, I'm really excited about this, I want to learn about it, you wouldn't say no. And so as a school leader, when a teacher comes to you and says the same thing, this is what I want to learn about, this is what I'm passionate about, this is what I want to investigate, how can you say no? So we've been doing a lot of saying yes lately when teachers are looking for opportunities for professional learning. If what we're offering as a district or what the school is offering doesn't meet the needs of that teacher, then we've been saying yes when they come forward.
And it does go hand in hand, right, with the fostering, as it says, absolutely, it fosters a lifelong learning in all, and that's what we want for all of our educators, and it's part of our OCT standards. So, provide the opportunity, so that's perfect.
I think we have to realize, I was just having a chat with someone today at one of our schools, Williams Parkway, and this teacher Andrew and Doug doing some fantastic work with project-based learning with some of their students. They were creating their own games out of Raspberry Pi, their own arcade games. So a little surreal, but it's interesting as we have a conversation that not everybody's ready for that open-ended piece. I know a lot of times we talk about our role is meeting teachers where they're at and giving them helping them take that learning path that they want to take. I think part of our jobs as educators, especially as coaches and leaders, is to help people feel comfortable with that. Not everybody's comfortable just walking in and going with the flow. It's something I love, that open-ended piece, but I've realized sometimes I stress people out by always leaving it open-ended. So sometimes it's about having that provocation or that spark, about setting the stage so that there's that comfort in exploring and not necessarily that stress of the unknown.
Right, and I think that, Tina, well said. That brings us back to that whole idea: relationships, and how important they are. And at Teach Mrs. K, shout out to Nicole Kaufman, I know, who's joining us from my board. Her one comment on Twitter is, you need to make a quote-unquote heart connection. Right, so it's building that trusting relationship first, and finding that entry point, and differentiating for the people that you work with if you're working at a district level providing support. And again, back to that community piece. Really, I think drawing on the resources that we have available. Our community partners want to be involved in what's happening in the classroom, and they just need that invitation and that entry point. Does anyone else want to speak to that question? Any opportunities for school community to have learning driven by their interests? We've talked a lot about relationship building and sort of how we see ourselves and our roles and ways we can enhance our program. No? Okay. So why don't we move on to Chapter 5. So the question that we want to put out to the panel here tonight is, what are some of the ways that you get in the middle of learning to understand the needs of those you serve? So if there's someone that would like to jump in and lead us off.
I'll start on this one.
Thanks.
So this one brings back another thing that I've been thinking about for quite a while, is around the idea about the further you get away from the student desk, the harder it is to connect what you do every day to student learning and remember why you have a job, whatever it is you're doing. And so that whole idea of getting in the middle of learning for me just brought back a kind of a whole other batch of things that I know I need to think about. But depending on your role, getting in the middle of learning can be a different thing. So I'm interested to hear what people out there think about getting in the middle of learning when you're not actually a classroom teacher. I'd really like to hear what people have to say about that.
Maybe I interpreted the question wrong. I saw the getting in the middle of learning as taking an active learner stance, as being a member of the community versus just a leader of the community. And I guess that takes a few different paths. Patrick, you made a good point about being in the classroom, and part of the fun part about my job is that I get to hang out with kids and try things out. And yesterday, trying out Tiny Tap and having a 4-year-old come hug you when you leave reminds you why you do it all, on the bad days and the good days. But I think in response to the question, I was seeing it more as being an active participant in the challenges and the tasks that we put out. I know I talked last time about the 10-day challenge, even doing things like the blog hop, where we're putting ourselves in the same role as everybody else in the community, and messing about in that environment. But maybe I misinterpreted it. Not sure.
I think what makes these questions so unique is that they can be interpreted in multiple ways. Patrick, when you spoke, I immediately connected with that idea about remaining connected and positioning yourself in the middle, being in schools with kids at the desk, as you said. And Tina, I also agree with you too that I think we can look at it from multiple perspectives. So I would love to hear some more perspectives from some of our panelists. Lisa or Michelle, if you want to jump in.
I was thinking when Patrick was talking about getting in the middle of learning, how when you observe people in the middle of an initiative, it's a kind of an easy way to figure out what people's needs are and where people are at by either their level of stress or their willingness to get on board on something that our school board is taking on. So when we did a 7 to 10 PLC, the learning continuum amongst the teachers was pretty broad, but by kind of listening to what everybody was talking about, it seemed like we had people who were attached to different kinds of learning with writing. And from that, I felt like I was kind of in the middle of it. And then as we started to work together over the couple of years with that PLC, everyone came together and worked in the same direction, but it was because we were listening to each other and sticking with the task of the PLC work. So I think that a key part of that for me is listening to where people are either stressed or feeling excitement about something.
For me, I'm kind of being pulled in different directions by people's different responses, which is awesome. Part of one of my kind of guiding questions all the time over the last few years since I've really started this journey has been the idea of how do we teach it if we're not doing it? And if you want to have your kids blogging or have your kids making their thinking visible, that's sometimes really hard to do if it's not something you're doing. If you're not taking part in that reflective process, or if you're not sharing your thinking beyond just your own space, it can be really hard to convince your students or your colleagues why that's a valuable exercise. And so for me, that's part of being in the middle of the learning, to actually just say, okay, if I'm going to ask my students to do this, I have to try it too, and I have to be brave. And that being in the middle of learning part for me has a lot to do with modeling reflection and with modeling metacognition with my students, is that through the process we stop and we go, okay, why is this hard? Or is it hard? Or what are our stumbling blocks? And that's really part of being in the middle of the learning for me, is really thinking about the why. Why are we doing this? What are we doing? How is it working or not working? And then and constantly going through that revisiting. That's the middle of the learning.
Well, I think to follow up with that, Lisa, one of the passages I really took to heart in this chapter is, what better way to build credibility with our students than to actually do what we're teaching them to do? You can't get any more in the middle than that, I don't think. And I really, I liked another passage here, asking us to really think about what we really know about our students' experiences while they're in school. How well do we actually understand what it's like to be a student in our own classroom? And maybe that can spark some discussion too. Anyone else like to chime in?
I'll just jump in with something from Twitter. We've got M. Hollingsworth and Amit both talking about the same thing, about how can you really facilitate something you have no experience of doing. And so getting yourself in the middle of that experience, so you're actually immersed in the learning. We had a couple of sessions at the district office today, and two kind of different outcomes. And in the first experience, the group was a little reluctant to take part in the activity that they were going to use with their students. And then in the second group, the instructions were barely out of the facilitator's mouth, and they were already all over it. And the difference in learning between those two groups, I think, is huge. So this whole idea that Emmett and M. Hollingsworth are talking about immersing yourself is crucial.
And I'll just step up here with two tweets here from Nancy and Kristen, and basically the same sentiment, that just learning those new learning tools with your students, and it's giving them the opportunity to see you taking risks and modeling that learning stance. And I had the opportunity to go to a student GAFE summit, and it was quite different than an adult GAFE summit, because the kids they didn't expect the adults to be the experts, and they listened for a little bit, and then they started to play, and we can learn a lot more from our kids when we just let them learn with us. And so I think that's really valuable, that sometimes we think we need to know it all, but they can teach us things, and it lets us know what their passions and interests are outside of the classroom. So yeah, we've got to give them a voice in the learning too, and learn right beside them.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
I've just got one more thing that just came through in Twitter that I need to go and do likely tomorrow, and it says, sit on a kindergarten carpet as often as possible. So I think that's from Anita Simpson, and that's key, and I'm going to do that tomorrow morning.
Sorry.
I'm nodding away here. Sorry, Lee. One of the neatest things that I ever did when we first started putting smart boards into our building, I did a lot of work with kindergartens. I was doing prep overlay, and I was just amazed at the difference between the way they interacted with the board and the way my adult colleagues who were learning interacted with the board, because it was completely different. And so one of the best things we did was actually asked some teachers to come in and watch the kindergartens and have the kindergartens show them how to use the board, because it was a totally different approach, because grown-ups were scared they were going to break it. And the kids just dived right in. They had no concerns. They had no fear. They loved the fact they could touch it. It was tactile. It was really, really powerful.
And I think at the other end of that, so we've been in the kindergarten classroom, and this was something that one of my administrators at Jeremy Brock shared, was that it's really important not only for bottom line, it's important for administrators to be at the table, and not just to be at the table doing something else. They need to dive in and dig into the work. And Trevor Hammers also chimed in. He's a technology coach with Avon Maitland, and he was in the middle of learning today during a PD session. And it's really important that those of us that do work at the system level, especially our administrators, sit at the table and take part in the work. They're part of creating something new, or part of that discussion about learning, not just sort of watching on the outside. So thank you for sharing those thoughts. Anyone else want to chime in about that? It's a great conversation.
There's one more that I've got one more here from Carrie Carlisle, and it says, being in the middle of learning requires comprehending learning as a constant. Check egos at the door and dive in, and then model. And I really like that idea of checking things at the door. We've done some work recently about checking roles at the door. And so when people come together in a learning community, the roles are left at the door, and everyone in that group is a learner.
Avon Maitland is representing tonight. Carrie Carlisle, another admin from my board. Awesome. I think someone else was going to chime in there too with a comment.
Hi Lee, it's Donna, and I want to just thank you for handling things so incredibly well tonight. We're down a few people. I wanted to welcome Michelle Parrish from my neck of the woods in northwestern Ontario. I actually got home, landed at 7 o'clock and had lots of time to get home, but ran into all kinds of problems tonight. And so thanks to Mark Carbone, who's with his daughter and running shotgun for me tonight. But I managed to get a second device, and I've been listening the whole time. And I just wanted to talk for one moment about what Patrick was saying, about how far you get away from the classroom and how challenging it is sometimes to remember why we're here and what we're doing this, why we're doing it. Mark and I were in a meeting today, and one of the questions that we were asked about Awesome is, what about your analytics? I mean, if you're not doing analytics, how are you figuring out what to do next? And we looked at each other a little bit quizzical, because analytics is not driving what we do. What's driving what we do is the learning needs of principals and superintendents and aspiring leaders all across Ontario. And everything we do is based on those learning needs, not how many people attended the last event. That's not what drives it for us. And I was thinking as you were, Patrick, as you were saying that you have to stay immersed in it, you know, here I am driving down the Trans-Canada Highway in a snowstorm with a Google Hangout playing on the seat beside me, and Mark sitting in a cafe in Toronto with his daughter. We are completely immersed in it because we want to be able to support leaders in what they're doing. So we need to be in it and knowing what it's like. And I think that Lisa mentioned that as well. If you're not doing it, how do you expect your kids to do it? And I think that all of this conversation just continues to emphasize the importance of having leaders being immersed in the work, doing the work, and bringing others along in the work. So I wanted to just add that piece that you're bang on with that kind of thinking. And for us, it's just been an incredible joy working with the 6 leaders in this Innovators Mindset book club, because it is just awesome to see how much enthusiasm you've brought to the idea of connecting leaders across the province under one topic. So thank you so much for all of your work on this, and thanks for hanging in there tonight with not as much support as you usually get from us.
Thanks, Donna. We're so glad you could join us. You still have your coat on. You didn't even get your coat off. Does anyone else want to speak to that idea of getting in the middle? All right, so all right, let's move on to chapter 6. So the question that we pulled from this chapter was, how do we create classrooms and schools where students and voices are not only heard but needed? I'm not sure who'd like to start us off with that one. And we talked a little bit about student voice earlier, but this, I think, repositions that idea as a need as opposed to something else. Oh, go ahead.
I think sometimes that this is sometimes one of those big walls for people. That idea of being able to open things up and say, what do we want to do next? And more than that, to really, I mean, if there's something big going on in your building, we're in the middle in my city of the eternal and dreaded accommodation review in terms of which schools are staying open and which ones are closing and which ones are moving together. And I really feel, sadly, like student voice has been missing in this process. I think there have been some attempts to pull it in, but I don't think we know really well how to do this well yet. I think it's really a learning curve, and any chance we get where we can open things up, and again, it's relationships and trust, convince the students that we genuinely want to know what they think, that it could be really transformative.
I think when you said, what do we want to do next, I was writing down on my jot notes here, not being satisfied with status quo and really wanting to be hungry to change things, and then having the awareness that that change can go from classroom to school to community, and then even nowadays with blogging, it can go across the world. So those are, I'm right on the same page as you with that one.
Is anything happening on Twitter, Stacy, Patrick, that you want to share?
We've got Wendy again talking about student voices are needed to create the empowerment that George is talking about. And it comes back to that whole thing about, you may feel like you're empowering your students or your staff, but if they don't feel it, if they don't feel empowered, then are you really empowering them? So there's no way you're going to find out if students feel empowered unless you talk to them.
So what if we come back to that idea? Because I think we all agree that student voices are absolutely needed. Student voice should be driving the learning that's happening in our classroom. I know in my board. The real focus on primary is that one specific foundation of learning related to the question we're discussing, and that's student inquiry. And without student voice, we have nothing to drive student inquiry. And if student voice isn't driving student inquiry, then are we actually engaging students in learning? And the next step beyond that, past engagement, is that idea of empowerment. And how are we empowering our students to own their own learning and take on that ownership? And Michelle, you'd mentioned blogging, and that's speaks to the work that I do in Avon Maitland. And for me, the blogging piece is empowering. It's very empowering in a way that provides students with a space to create something authentic that's uniquely their own. It's also a platform they can use to make those community connections and engage with other students or experts or community members, and most importantly, their family, to continue conversations about learning. So maybe the question I'll put out to the group then, and maybe you could share this on Twitter, is how do you empower learners in your space, in your classroom or in your school or in your district? How are you empowering learners?
I'll just jump in there for just a moment, because we've had a little bit of chatting about this topic on our Voxer group. And for anyone who is interested in joining the Voxer group, the instructions to join are on the Awesome MOOC website, awesomemook.wordpress.com. So just scroll down and you can certainly join. And Voxer's been a really fantastic way to discuss the book, because when you're reading the book and something comes to mind, you just press the button and you talk about it. And then by the time you wake up the next morning, there's 15 people that have chimed in on that topic. But one of the things that we've been talking about around student voice is what we've done to kids around the idea of school. So when we ask them questions like, what do you think school could be? They're so constrained by their current idea of school. And it reminds me when Dalton McGuinty went to the Toronto Star one time and said that he had asked students what they thought of having cell phones in classrooms, and most kids didn't want them. Well, that's because most kids think of school as a place where you've got to memorize and write a test, and the last thing they want is a cell phone there. They couldn't see the possibilities of having a cell phone for learning. So when we have worked with kids so that they have this very structured, very constrained idea of what school is, we have to remember that when we ask them questions about what school could be, that they're coming from a very constrained viewpoint, and we're responsible for that. I think in the Voxer group we were talking about the 2013 MSAC graphic, and what that is the Minister's Student Advisory Council, and the graphic is called Students' Ideas of what the future of learning will look like, or what the future of school will look like, or something like that. And several of us said when we saw that graphic, the first thing we thought was, oh my gosh, that none of this is imagination. I guess it was called Students Imagine the Future of Learning, or something like that. There was nothing there that was imaginative. It was all things that could already be done. But I think there were things that kids were not experiencing because they were experiencing such a constrained view of school. So all of that I just said was to get to the idea that sometimes when we ask for student voice, we forget that it's not necessarily a view of what could be that hasn't already been shaped really strongly by their school experiences. And sometimes when we talk about unlearning that's required by educators, we forget that kids also have to unlearn. That school doesn't necessarily mean read the textbook, answer the questions, and know it really well for the test. So instead of doing school, rethinking learning. And we have to coach them along with that a little bit before they're able to give us really, really strong feedback.
There's a quote in the book that, as I was going through, just stood out to me again, that innovative leaders help people continuously grow with small steps that build both confidence and competence so that they are more willing and able to become more innovative themselves. And I think if that really encapsulates that piece about empowerment. I think sometimes when we talk about voice and choice, we put it out there, and yes, there's the listening, but somehow we have to build that confidence for kids, for learners of all ages, whether adults or kids, to really feel like they have the confidence to advocate for themselves, I guess. I don't know. I'm trying to think it through.
Had an interest response to a tweet I saw on the stream tonight. Someone was talking about sort of student-driven clubs, and I've kind of been delighted this year in our building that our grade sixes, for the most part, seem to really have grasped that if they can go and find somebody and ask, they can probably do a club around just about anything. So we have a nail art club this year, which is not something that would have occurred to some of us to offer, and a group of boys who have started a tech deck club where they're playing with their little mini skateboards and building ramps and doing things like that. And all they needed to do was find somebody who would sit and let them share what they wanted to do. And I think that's something I needed the reminder of, that I can offer the things that I think would be fun, but it's not necessarily what my students are looking for. And being able to really listen and say, okay, yeah, what do you guys want to do? It's liberating.
I think too, we've got Kim and Scott on Twitter both saying similar things about empowerment and the difference between empowerment and engagement. And it's one thing to engage somebody, but for me, engagement could have a finite time limit. You know, you engage them for the time they're there, but if you empower people, then they have that forever, and they can carry on long after your class is over.
Patrick, I just want to add to that as well. Andy Hargraves does a lot of work on demonstrating that engagement doesn't necessarily mean learning is happening, that people can be highly engaged and not necessarily learning anything. And the empowerment piece is so important because I think sometimes students think they might get in trouble if they use their voice. And so the work that we do as leaders in the school to co-create an environment, and I think it was Sarah Brillinger that said on Twitter that co-creation of the environment is so critical. If we co-create an environment where students can feel like they can be critical of what's happening in classrooms, that they have a voice to be able to say that without being in trouble, that's so critical, because we're not going to get that student voice if they don't feel safe in coming to you with their concerns.
And that brings us back to relationships, relationships, relationships. Well said. And I wanted to pull in some tweets here too. I saw one from, oh, sorry, I lost my spot here. Yeah, sorry. No, you know what? Go ahead, Stacey, because I'm going to find it. I wanted to share something that was here. Yep, no
go
problem.
ahead and find it. I'm reading a tweet here from Scott who says, empower learners by taking their ideas seriously. I actively carry out their suggestions to improve our class. So from there, I mean, that feedback is extremely important, but if you're not going to honor it and actually show that you're actually doing something with the feedback, then they're going to learn very quickly that it's not valued. And so again, going with the idea of the feedback, but also you need to have that open relationship and trust in your classroom. So go ahead, Leah, I'll pass that back to you.
Awesome, and I thank you for that. Love that you jumped in there. So I found it. It's a tweet shared by Carrie Carlisle, another tweet by her. She's an administrator with AMDSB, and it was, students must learn how to share voice. Those most quiet, often deepest thoughts allow variance for expression and listen. And a number, I mean, I got goosebumps actually just reading that. There are a number of things that resonate with me, and I think landing on that idea of listening. Right, and remembering that, and this is back to that question that students' voices are heard but not needed. What about those voices that we don't hear so often, and how are we providing opportunities for those voices that may be less obvious or outspoken to be heard? So that was a great idea shared there. Patrick, I see you're chimed in here.
Sorry, no, I'm still trying to catch up with this. Is crazy.
It's insane. Lee, I'll just jump off that because it was actually Miss E, who is a primary teacher with my board, but she was answering to an earlier question about using Google Forms to collect information on what kind of PD teachers would like. But I do like the idea of Google Forms in the classroom as a way to either gather information about possible topics, but also as a way to allow students to have a voice that normally wouldn't raise their hand or come out and say something. I think those kind of tools really lend a really safe platform for kids who would rather just sort of sit back and take it all in, but they have a very strong voice in the digital world. So I think that's really important to remember, that we have those tools out there that are available to us that will empower some of our more quiet students.
Had an interesting experience with a student teacher at one point where we had used an exit ticket as a reflection point. So we had tried something kind of new with working on directions in French and working with real world maps, and it had been a little chaotic, and so I had an exit ticket. I had the kids just write what they liked, what they didn't like on the way out. And then I sat down with them, and the next class we talked about the pluses and minuses. And the student teacher afterwards said, "That's the first time I've ever seen follow-up on an exit ticket." She said, I have completed those throughout my learning life, and I've never gotten feedback on them." And I thought, okay, so there's that thing. If we're asking for it and then we're not going to use it, then it becomes an empty exercise.
That is so true, and I just wanted to share something that the TELC Contacts experienced last year with who I think is a brilliant principal, Lisa Neal from Hamilton Wentworth District School Board. And Lisa has a student advisory council that she meets with constantly in a very structured way. And when we brought the TELC Contacts in for the day, she wanted the kids to talk to the TELC Contacts about what they were doing in the school so that we would hear it from the student voice. And I thought, well, that was a really interesting idea. That was wonderful to bring in all of her student advisors. And they came in and sat at tables with the TELC Contacts and had great, structured conversations. And I thought it went well. But then she just stopped everything. And for 5 minutes, she told everyone to grab a sheet of paper from the middle of the table and write what they thought was most important to let the TELC Contacts know before they left. And then she pulled me aside and she pointed out a couple of students in the room who were writing page after page after page after page, and she said to me, "You didn't hear them say a word, did you, during this whole time? Look at the people who were doing all the talking, and they were writing 1 or 2 words, and that was it." So she had learned that by providing a number of different ways for student voice to be heard, she would make sure that she was gathering all the voices and not just the loud voices in the room. So we learned a great deal that day about really differentiating the way that students provided feedback, but not to single anybody out. Everybody felt included in the process. So it was really good learning for all of us that day.
Hey Donna, that it makes me think about some student panels that we have done in the past, and it's difficult because you ask a principal, if you're going into a school, you ask the principal for a representative sample of the school, but it's so difficult for a principal to put some kids on that panel knowing what they might say. But at the end of when we've asked all our questions, the last question is usually something like, you students here today have had a chance to talk to us, whose voice is missing? Right? So which of your friends or your peers or maybe just other kids in your school, whose voice is not heard here today? And that's when you find out who's missing from that panel.
Wonderful, thank you. I am just looking at the time, so I would like to wrap things up tonight by actually sharing a few of George Kouros's what ifs at the end of part 2. So what if we believed that everything we had to make great schools was already within our organization and we just needed to develop and share it? What if schools operated as if we should all be learners as opposed to students being the only learners? What if we recognized and built on all learners' strengths? And what if we empowered students to make a difference in the world today and in the future? So on that note, I want to thank all of our panelists for the great conversation tonight. I want to thank those of you that tuned in to our Google Hangout and have been sharing your comments below. I want to shout out to those of you on Twitter who have been madly tweeting and sharing your ideas there as well. Tonight's conversation was amazing. So thank you for your time tonight, and we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks' time for our next Google Hangout. In the meantime, please watch for our next blog hop question, and hopefully you'll join us by sharing your thoughts and writing a blog post as we continue our learning about what it means to have an innovator's mindset. Thank you and good night.
So I apologize to those of you that are still watching. I'm the one that has to turn this off, the live off. And I'm the one with almost no internet. So everybody hang in there quietly for one moment and we will get this off the air. Technical difficulties all over the place tonight.
Thanks, Donna. We can give that a woo!
This cheesecake isn't from Corsoons. Shipping it in from LA, way too expensive. It's from...
Your mic's on, Jen. What are you watching? I think we're still on air.